Today's program is The Forgotten Bangalorean Soldiers, the Untold World War II Stories of Indian Troops and Families. Set against war-torn Singapore in 1942, The Forgotten Indian Prisoners of World War II recounts the remarkable story of Captain Mohan Singh and the birth of the INA. Gautam Hazarika traces the Indian National Army's march through the Burmese jungles to post-war India and the rise of Subhash Chandra Bose, while also portraying Lieutenant M.M. Pillai's daring escape, the brutal ordeals of POWs like John Baptiste Crasta, and the Australian war crime trials where Subender Chint Singh testified. The book is also available for sale outside. So for those of you who haven't already picked up a copy, please do. Gautam will be signing after the session. We have a versatile evening for you today filled with some talks, some personal accounts, fireside chats, and audience Q&A. So before we officially begin the evening, may I please request the audience to kindly put their phones on silent or switch them off for the next 90 minutes. With that, I'd like to invite Rear Admiral Sampath Pillai, son of Brigadier M.M. Pillai, MC of the Bombay Sappers, to release the book. Rear Admiral Sampath Pillai joined the NDA in 1961 and subsequently the Indian Navy in 1964. His last operational command was as the Commodore, Indian Naval Flotilla in Somalia as part of the United Nations peacekeeping force there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I speak to introduce Gautam Hazarika and his book, The Forgotten Indian Prisoners of War, World War II. The book was launched last week in Delhi, am I right, Gautam? And today we welcome it in Bangalore. The last four words in the subtitle are very specific: surrender, loyalty, betrayal, and hell. All these four aspects feature as a thread through the entire book. Gautam lives and works in Singapore. And Singapore has this fascinating mix of Chinese, Indian, and Malay populations, along with dozens of other expatriate nationalities. No one who lives there or even visits Singapore for a short while can miss the exciting and colorful mix that permeates right through that interesting state. But even the casual visitor will also note certain relics that commemorate the fall of Singapore on 15 February 1942. That was the most humiliating defeat and surrender suffered by any British commanded military force, worse even than the fall of Kut-e Amara in Iraq in 1916. The Japanese occupied Singapore for 4 years, till September 1945. Names like Changi, Farrer Park, Bidadari in Little India today all resonate. Different memories, separate inflections, and various opinions. The Indian National Army was created and operated from Singapore in collaboration with the Japanese. Right at the heart of Singapore, at the Esplanade Park, stands a marker. The INA marker merely indicates the site at which was once the INA monument. The marker is small, it's a modest stone slab that tells us where the actual INA monument stood. The erstwhile monument, an elegant, large stone structure designed as it happens by Colonel Cyril John Stracey of Bangalore, who was then a senior officer of the INA, was inaugurated by Subhash Chandra Bose in mid-1945, just weeks before the recapture of Singapore by the Allies. So that monument was very short-lived. It was demolished by the British and Indian Army troops soon after Singapore was recaptured. But in 1995, 50 years later, recognizing the historicity of the site and financed by donations from the Indian community in Singapore, the government erected a marker at this site to mark the earlier INA monument. It still stands. I tell the story of this marker as indicative of how confusing those 4 years of our history were, and how we need to look back at this heritage of ours with an unprejudiced eye and as dispassionately as possible, to learn more of our own heritage. Gautam's book goes a long way in clarifying some of what happened then. My father, Markandan Pillai, features in the book. On the cover, he is the second from the left, next to Mohan Singh. He did not join the INA. Quite the opposite. He was determined not to remain a prisoner of war, and he formulated his own plans long before the actual surrender of Singapore to the Japanese army. And he succeeded, being the first Indian Army officer, the Indian Army person to escape and return to India, one of only 5 officers to do so eventually. Gautam tells his story in one of the chapters of his book. But the main protagonists of the narrative are the 45,000 and more Indian prisoners of war who remained in Singapore, many of them, as the book tells you, transported and used as slave labor in Borneo, Papua New Guinea. There were many other notorious places, such as the Death Railway in Siam. Some may recall the film The Bridge on the River Kwai that depicted that site. On a personal reminiscence, the British commanding officer of my father's unit, the 45th Army Troops Company, an engineer company, Major Ronald Dinwoody, was actually found 2 months after the end of the war in an abandoned prison camp at Mukden in then Manchuria, which is now Shenyang in northern China. I still recall as a young boy of 9 or 10 overhearing these conversations about that in Pune between survivors of the unit many years after the war. Of the 8 officers and 240 Jawans in that company, 4 officers and 97 men were killed during the 2-month-long fighting retreat south through Malaya, and many more died as prisoners of war in Singapore and other places. This book starts with the tale of, to my mind, an unsung hero, the story of Mohan Singh, the Sardarji gentleman you see here. He was from the very first batch of cadets of the Indian Military Academy in Dehradun in 1932. Before that, all officer entrants into the Indian Army had to go to Britain to train at Sandhurst. His batchmates in his batch in Dehradun were Field Marshal Manekshaw of 1971 fame, General Dunn, who later commanded the Burmese army, and several other generals of both the Indian and the Pakistan armies. He was a captain in 1942. At the defeat of his unit in the first battle at Jitra, he then led a group of his soldiers across to the Japanese units. His motive, to my mind, was just patriotism to the Indian independence movement than for any other reason. His heroes were, it's recorded, Gandhi, Nehru, and Bose. He led the INA by sheer force of personality and a certain amount of ruthlessness. But he was sidelined by the end of 1942, when he found the Japanese not being as cooperative as he had expected them to be. His incredible story, with eventually a satisfactory ending after independence, is recounted in detail in this book. And the stories of many more affected soldiers, their accounts would have remained untold but for Gautam's dogged research and wide-ranging efforts. First, the stories of the INA itself, both the good stories as well as the bitter ones. For that truly was the fate of the INA. A mix of motivations, a mix of results, and an ending that was eventually bittersweet. The stories of transportation to far-flung areas of the Japanese occupation in Southeast Asia and beyond, of working as slave labor, of torture, executions in direct contravention of all tenets of the rules of war, of survival against all odds, and the stories of the families left behind with little or no news of their loved ones, are all part of this book. Gautam has located and told the stories of some of them. His research and attention to detail are meticulous. I was fascinated by the story of the court-martial set up by the Australian authorities to deal with certain Japanese atrocities, and the testimony of a specific soldier, Chin Singh, as also the tragic death of many of his fellow prisoners in an air crash while being repatriated home. Gautam has dedicated his book to their memory. I now look forward to hearing from both the writer of the book as well as the relatives of some of those who escaped. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to now invite Major General Mutanna of the Garhwal Rifles, author and nephew of General S. Timaya of the Indian Army, to deliver the keynote address. He spent most of his 37 plus years service in counter-terror and mountain areas. He established the Karnataka State Police's Center for Counter-Terrorism and also the Garuda Force. In his second career, he's Director of HR and Training with the Trident Automobiles in Bangalore.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, I see a lot of familiar faces. Oh, that's nice. Well, I think I don't need to say very much after what Rear Admiral Pillai has said. It was Providence when I, got connected with Gautam, and thanks to that journey where Gautam connected with me through a common friend, Lieutenant General Gupta, and then how we progressed with his research, the information he shared with me, and the way I could help him. But I knew a few families who were connected with the INA, or rather, who had been prisoners. And that's how we have a few of them sitting here today. So Gautam's book, for me itself, has been a journey. And a journey because, well, one did know about the INA, and very frankly, not enough. And after reading Gautam's book, I find myself actually completely, I won't say completely, but very educated about the INA, as he refers to them as the first INA, and then the remnants of the first INA, and then finally the second INA is what we are all very familiar with, which was considered Subhash Chandra Bose's INA. Very early in service, I was fortunate to be posted, deployed in Nagaland and Manipur, and then we went to this place called Moirang in Manipur, which was where they had raised the flag, and it was considered to be the place where the first true flag of Indian independence had been raised, and that was done by the INA. So for me, that connection was there. But interestingly, I was commissioned in the Army in 1978. And as part of our commissioning, I have my senior both from school and in the Army, General Halgali here. As part of the commissioning, we have an oath. And that oath is something all of us take very seriously. The oath talks about serving the country, serving the Constitution, obeying the orders of the President, and then going wherever anyone who has been placed above us, even to the peril of our lives. So that was one issue. If you look at how the soldiers of that day, whether they were British or Indian, whether they were officers or Jawans, who had taken this oath. Now, the oath then, and even the oath today, is taken with a pinch of salt. When I say a pinch of salt, I don't mean the pinch of salt as we talk about exaggeration, but there is a namak. I mean, you actually have that salt, and you say it that I am swearing by the salt of the loyalty to the oath that I'm taking. Of course, in today's army, it is done in a different way. There's a flag and the religious books, and every soldier reaches out his hand. The officers recite the oath when they are getting commissioned from their academies. But that oath is something all of us take very seriously. And I can only imagine the quandary that the officers and the men would have had in that day and time in 1942 in Singapore, where the so-called mighty British army, led by those demigods whom we all call Saab, the large Saabs, the white men, with a sprinkling of a few brown Indians there as officers, suddenly collapsed. Orders were vague, they were rescinded, they were changed, and there was no pitched battle actually given to the Japanese. And then finally when they surrendered, and after surrendering, their officers were immediately separated. And once the officers were separated, then the entire Japanese machinery began doing its, playing the game that to demoralize these people, to milk the propaganda there was by virtue of the fact that these people had been captured. And into that strides Captain Mohan Singh, who later on was appointed as General Mohan Singh. And I think for me, as I said, it was an education because the way Gautam brings it all out step by step, how Mohan Singh created it, what was it that he did, even the documentation that they did, to create a structure and to legalize, uh, I would say to give it a structure and formalize how the INA was established. What were his objectives? What were his expectations from the Japanese and how they worked? And then finally, how Mohan Singh, realizing that the Japanese were not going to live up to their word, started opposing them to an extent that they sidelined him. So the story goes on, and in this mix, in this thread, you have the first INA, you have the interim INA, and then you have the second INA, the decisions they took. There were instances where INA soldiers were executed for cowardice in the face of the enemy, or executed for not obeying orders and not going into battle. There are stories of how the INA soldiers, despite being ill-equipped, despite being ill-clothed, but in that fervor of nationalism, carried out military operations. And then finally, when they had to retreat, because that's when General Bill Slim and the 14th Army, the forgotten 14th Army of the British Army, literally steamrollered down, pushing, wiping out the Japanese and then moving down. So how the INA Army had to finally withdraw and how they fell back into Singapore. Another thing that happened was that during our research, the query actually started. Gautam was reaching out to me because he had heard of one Major Ponappa, and then he was trying to figure out who this man was. And then being from that community where our names are unique, but at the same time very common within the community, I knew who it was. And I see his nephew here, real nephew here. Belly somewhere here? Oh yeah, Belly's there. Okay, so pardon? Grandnephew, the real grandnephew. I am though my introduction was that I was a nephew, General Timaya and my father were actually first cousins, and that's how I claim to be his nephew. Ponappa was actually General Timaya's brother, and I had heard stories about him, and that connection made it. And then interestingly, the British had, Gautam was able to access the records of his interrogation report, which he shared with me, and I found that so fascinating. I didn't know that facet of Major Ponappa, how he dealt with it, what he did. He was a lieutenant colonel in the INA. The stories I later on hear from his niece, okay, his sister's daughter, who's married to a brigadier, and she says that being a lieutenant colonel in the INA meant that he was very close to Subhash Chandra Bose. He was looking after logistics, and then of course. The story goes, I don't know how true it is that when Subhash Chandra Bose was to evacuate, or if you can use that word, escape from Singapore and from the British, he told Ponappa, come along with me. And Ponappa said, I'm not keeping too well. They were all debilitated because of poor food and, hardships, till many of them switched over to the INA. So Ponappa said, I can't do it. I'll only hold you up. And then that's how Subhash Chandra Bose escaped. Apparently, Ponappa organized the logistics for the evacuation from Singapore, and then later on, of course, he was captured, and then he was interrogated. The interrogation report labels him as black. That's what most militaries do when you interrogate a suspect. If he's cleared of all whatever allegations or wrongdoing, you call him white. If he's some doubt, is that gray? And if he's a hardcore guy, you call him black. So this guy, Ponappa, was termed black. And I'm told that he was amongst the prisoners who were taken to the Red Fort. And we all hear of the famous INA trials where 3 of them were put on trial. And he was also possibly in the line there to be tried till that whole trial got scrapped. So for me, most fascinating thing about the book was the quandary that the men and the officers faced. Somewhere I was reading that some cases the officers had to tell the men, look, join the INA if not for anything else. If you don't want to violate your oath, but join it to survive. Because here the options were to be a prisoner of war and to be ill-treated, as was said. Many of them were shipped off to slave camps, and the stories that he conveys in the book is something literally makes you wonder how these guys, manage to live each day out. You have no food, you have no medicines, you have nothing, you have back-breaking work, and then if you default in work, you again get punished. It is something that is you just can't wrap your head around. In more recent times, we have cases of our own Saurabh Kalia, if you all read about that, 1999 in Kargil war, the type of treatment that was meted out to him. I was talking to Brigadier Karyappa, who was a Veer Chakra and went into an attack, one of the attacks in the Batalik sector. And in his video, if you guys Google him and check it out, he talks about saving one bullet, that in case they ran out of ammunition and in case they were left with no option, and if they were going in the position of being captured, they would use it on themselves. So you can imagine the quandary that these soldiers, these Indian soldiers in Second World War, I presume most of them would have been relatively uneducated. When I joined the army in 78, a lot of my Jawans were fifth class pass. I mean, that didn't stop them from mastering their weapons and understanding what was done. But at the same time, that was their education. So there were units where the JCOs, that is the I would say they were called the class 2 officers. They were not the class 1, if you can want to distinguish between that. The JCOs held by the men and told them, don't switch allegiance, don't join the INA. And then I don't know how they survived. In some cases, even officers, if you look at the interrogation reports that are there, some people encourage their men, take that, learn to survive, so join the INA and manage for yourself. So I must compliment Gautam, a good Indian, sitting so far away in Singapore, for having done that research and brought all those stories to our lives. I thank you very much, Gautam, and I would like to say again, thank you all of you for being here today.
Thank you, Major General. Now, for the conversation part of this evening, I'd like to invite Gautam Hazarika and Varun Khanna to explore the research and hidden histories behind this book.
Yeah, hi, good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to have you all here. And it's indeed an honor to have you here with us, considering you are from Singapore. And we are much delighted. So, in fact, Gautam, it'll be great to know that what prompted you and further motivated you to actually write this book.
Firstly, thank you all for coming. I was very worried when I arrived this evening to see that wonderful exhibition of achars and clothes and jewelry. I thought no one would reach here. So wonderful to see you here. Everyone asked me this question about why I chose this topic, why I chose to research it and write about it. It's when I stumbled upon it, as it happens, I realize now that many books people write is not because they knew 10 years ago that they're going to do it. It's something they stumble upon and they get fascinated by the topic and they get very passionate about it. That's what happened to me. I didn't know many of these stories. And so I'd just like to ask the audience, before you came here, before you heard about whatever you've heard in the last half an hour, how many of you had heard of Captain Mohan Singh? Could you raise your hands? Okay, so you can see that it's like a sprinkling of 4 or 5. So I was one of the other 50 who had not heard of Mohan Singh. And I found him very fascinating. So that was one reason that I didn't know about this. And again, I repeat the same question. How many of you before you came here knew that 10,000 of our soldiers died in Papua New Guinea in Auschwitz type, almost Auschwitz type conditions? So same answer, you just know 3, 4 of you know. I didn't know about this at all. It was in fact that story that, I was told about once in Singapore. And that's how I began looking into this. Yeah, it's mainly this. I found the stories fascinating. I found that people, I didn't know about it, and I thought India should know. I mean, I don't mean to say that, I'm the person people should listen to, but I did feel strongly that we should know about these brave men and the brave women, the wives back home here. So that's why I chose.
Great. Gautam, it's a lovely book, very well articulated, very well written. And also I think it somehow connects with the people. So there's not too much of the military jargon what you would associate with history. And that is something I think that comes out brilliantly well. Now that we were speaking about General Mohan, it would be a pleasure if we could learn a few more things about him.
So what I discovered was that the INA was not formed by Netaji as I thought, but it was formed 18 months before he arrived in Singapore by Captain Mohan Singh. Of course, Captain Mohan Singh was not the sole person behind being started. There were many other forces behind him, but he was the first commander. He was a 32-year-old middle class nobody. No one knew him outside his battalion, whereas the Indian Army was, there were many officers who were very well known across by everyone, but no one knew Mohan Singh outside his unit. He was a 32-year-old middle class officer from Dehradun, whereas many of the others were upper class, very well educated from Sandhurst. And what Netaji did can be expected of him because he was a person of great stature. He came from a very privileged family, great education, lots of help. He, was hobnobbed. I mean, he was, the senior politician. He was the president of the Congress party. What he did, I would expect him to have done. But what Mohan Singh did, being a nobody, a 32-year-old nobody, is something that I didn't expect him to have succeeded. And though, as Admiral Pillai said, he had a streak of ruthlessness in him, he certainly was able to get several dozen officers senior to him become part of his movement. He was able to get 60,000 soldiers, effectively become their head. And I just found that entire story very fascinating. And I must mention to you that during the war, after the Japanese decided, after he stopped cooperating with the Japanese, they arrested him and kept him in exile. They didn't do anything worse to him because they respected him and they knew that the Indian population, the soldiers and the civilians would be, there'd be an outcry if they touched a hair on his head. In the last 2 years of his exile, he was with two other Indians, and he made them a promise that if we become free, then we live together as brothers. And he redeemed that pledge after the war. He had a house with 3 bedrooms, and he called those 2 men to live with them. He had 1 bedroom, and the other 2 men had the other 2 bedrooms. And he did one more thing that I would not do for my own children in my lifetime. In his own lifetime, he divided his property up into 3 parts. 1 to him and his bloodline, 1/3 to the second person, and the third to the third person, which was quite an incredible thing. And they lived as one big family. In fact, he was called Bade Papa, the other gentleman was called Chote Papa, and the third one was called Chacha. And one son-in-law told me that when he first went to visit them, and he was told this is Badi Mummy and Choti Mummy, he thought that, in the old days, our grandfathers used to have Badi Mummies and Choti Mummies. He later on realized that they were wives of 2 different men. So this was the incredible man that he was, and that's why he's the first person on the cover. And he really fascinated me.
Yeah, it truly is very fascinating. In fact, also you've done a deep research and you've done a deep dive into very, very tragic situations which actually happened at Papua New Guinea.
Yeah.
Could you actually bring that to light, that how you felt about it while you were undergoing your research? Very emotional, I'm sure.
Yeah. So for the Japanese, all Allied POWs in Singapore, Malaysia, wherever they were captured them, were basically fodder. They were raw material for laborers to be used. So many of us might have heard or seen the movie Bridge on the River Kwai. What we don't know is that besides the 60,000 British prisoners, Allied and Australian prisoners, there were 220,000 Tamil civilians who were sent to build the Burma Railway, of whom 120,000 died. So, this is one other story that I didn't know about. In addition to that, I discovered that they were using the Indian soldiers also for labor. It didn't matter to them whether you would sign the INA or not sign the INA. If you were a man, they wanted you to work and build bridges. So the Indian POWs also had their own equivalent of the bridge on the River Kwai in New Guinea. And I also found that while they were being shipped there, the US and the Allies were bombing every Japanese ship they could find. And they knew that there were Allied POWs on board, but they were accepted collateral damage. And there is one ship in which 2,000 men died on that day. And then I don't have too much documentary details of the sinking of that ship, but there's another ship which was sunk, and there's a great amount of detail on it. So there were 497 Indian soldiers on that ship. And there's an account from one Indian captain who was in the ship. There's an account from an Indian NCO who was in a ship next to it watching them. And there's an account from the commander of the American submarine and his XO, the second in command, who were firing torpedoes at the ship. And there's also a photograph of the torpedoes going from the submarine to the ship. And the Indian captain describes what happens to them. And most of them didn't die in the sinking. They died because they were left behind by the Japanese when they got rescued the next day. And another thing happened was that the American submarine surfaced, and the American captain started firing at all the men in the water, which is illegal under international law then and even now. But the Americans supported him. And all this evidence was carefully airbrushed after the war. I discovered from a British researcher that in subsequent war crimes trials, when they were taking evidence from that Indian captain on the ship for another atrocity, he gave an account of his entire war, including the sinking of the ship and the surfacing by the American submarine and the firing of the submarine into the water on Japanese and Indian POWs. And the courts airbrushed that part of the affidavit out and made him only read out the other part of it because they didn't want this part to come out. So these are the things that happen in war. Once they reached Papua New Guinea, they had a horrible time there. Horrible is just doesn't describe it. There were about 14,000 men who eventually reached, and 7,000 returned back to India. There is one Bangalorean family, and I hope to have another gathering of family members in a few months, whose father was one of those men, and he wrote a very poignant memoir about it called "Eaten by the Japanese." There was one particular island, the actual island of New Guinea, in which 3,000 Indian soldiers were, and only one man out of all of those men returned to India. So that's how bad their experience was. So Papua New Guinea was really, really horrific, really horrific.
Well, in fact, there's so much of time, effort, and of course, you have actually accessed such information which is so well researched. Kudos to you on that. Many, many congratulations. But also, I think what works very well in the book is that you've got in touch with families who have been associated with this particular incidents. So how did you go about getting in touch with them? Because that must have been quite a Herculean task.
The family research has been the most fascinating, the most sad, and the most difficult part actually of actually doing it. And it's also been quite amusing at times. The most difficult part is actually reaching out to them. And so, for example, General Mathana has been really very helpful in enabling that. In fact, one of the family members here, Air Marshal Chengappa, has just arrived. It's only because I was introduced to him through the general. And Sir will talk about his family's war later. When one finally gets a contact number. In fact, Sir, you were one of the first. I found your father's story by Googling. I found your talk about him in the BIC downstairs. Wonderful talk, by the way. I watched every minute of it. And while watching it, I discovered that there was the other escape of the Sikh soldiers, which I didn't know about either. And so Google led me to you. Then Scott Lee, the China, gave me your contact number. And eventually we spoke, like actually very quickly we spoke, and 2.5 years we've been talking, and I've been pestering every Pillai brother. There are 4 of them, by the way, across the world in doing this. I think when one reaches out to a family, the first thing I realized was that it was a very delicate trust that they were, it was a very delicate story, history, memory that they were entrusting. And they needed to know. So one family, after I met them, they said, the first question they asked me was that, what is your intention? How are you going to portray the men? And I remember thinking that I felt like I was a son-in-law being interviewed. And in a way, I was joining the family. And in a way, I was being interviewed for, was I fit to be told, very private thoughts of the family. So, one thing is to really to understand, to know what it means for the family to talk about it. There's another another story. This is a captain who was beheaded in New Guinea. So I spoke to his grandson, and I asked him, and I'll switch to Hindi if you don't mind. I asked him, "आपको पता था दादाजी को क्या हुआ?" तो उन्होंने बोला कि दादाजी के साथ बहुत नाइंसाफी हुई. उनको जापानियों ने शूट करके मार दिया. So I knew immediately that he did not know actually what happened to him. So I didn't know what to do. Should I tell him that his beheading was very gruesome, because it's very difficult actually to behead someone, and it took 2-3 strokes of the sword, very described in very great detail by the Japanese, because they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They were following their own code. According to them, they used to behead their own soldiers if they did the same thing. So I told him in the next call that unko talwar se mara gaya. I still couldn't say, I didn't say gala kaat, that sort of stuff. I just couldn't use those words. And I still haven't told him that what actually eventually happened. Anyway, so I also told him that I have got in touch with the man second from the right, who is Jamadar Chin Singh that Sandhya was telling you about, who was the one survivor from New Guinea, who gave a lot of evidence for the war crimes trials. And I told him कि मैं उनके बेटे को जानता हूँ और आप उनसे बात करेंगे, क्योंकि उन्होंने आपके लिए, आपके दादा के लिए इंसाफ कराया. तो उसने कहा कि इंसाफ तो आपने करवाया है. No, it's okay. इंसाफ तो आपने दिलाया है उनके बारे में लिख के. So I was very touched to hear that. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm fine. It was wonderful to hear that. Really, I really felt that I'd done something in my life. Just to hear him say this. Yeah. So there've been many such stories. Fortunately, the others have been very happy and
And I'm sure many more people will come out now in the open. And
yes.
connect with
I
you.
just
And
discovered
the
one
thing
family
is-
last week
Yeah.
at the event in Delhi, and it was fantastic to hear about them.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a beautiful moment. It's our way of saying thank you to these families, and it really means a lot to them. Our sacrifice of our Indian soldiers. So, yeah, that's absolutely.
There's one other part, Varun, that I want to mention is that I think something I didn't think about, care about, know about until I discovered the story of Sapper Marimuthu, who we'll hear about more, is that the story of a soldier, his story is only half the story, or maybe even less than half the story. The full story is when you take into account his wife, his mother, and his family left behind at home. And in the case of these men, their wives and mothers had no news of them for 5 years. All they knew is that they had been defeated, they had surrendered. They just knew that the Japanese were very harsh and brutal. They didn't know where they were. They had little money, young children to handle, to manage, and to grow up. and there were many families where the other brothers were actually asking the government to declare their soldier brother dead so that they could take over their property. And as I wasn't going to mention it, but at the Indian event, at the Delhi event, someone did add on that they were also wanting to take over their sister-in-law. So this is what the families were going through, and this extremely important half of the story is very important for us to know. And I'll repeat something I said in Delhi is that if I have the luck of having a second edition, there's one glaring mistake, error, something missing in my book. There are only 4 men on this cover. There's no women. So if I have the luck of a second edition or something, I'm going to have a woman in the background, because behind all of these men was a very, very strong and very, very strong, gritty woman who survived those 5 years without him. So yes, that's the most, I think that's the thing that really came out to me most, is
Right.
about the waiting wives, as I call them.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. हम आपके शुक्रगुजार हैं कि आप आज इधर आए हैं, और हम सब के तरफ से मैं आपको बोलना चाहता हूँ कि हमें बहुत बहुत ही अच्छा लग रहा है कि आज आप इधर हैं हमारे साथ, और आप जो भी आपके मन में है, जैसे उस टाइम वक्त था और जो सोच विचार आपके घर में था, वो हम तो हमें पता नहीं चलेगा कि क्या था। तो इसीलिए आज आप अगर हमें कुछ बताएंगे तो बहुत बढ़िया लगे।
मैं तो सिपाही मारी मुत्तु का डॉक्टर है, लास्ट डॉक्टर है, वो डॉक्टर है। मैं फादर तो हम लोग को छोड़ के हम लोग को, हमारा माँ का तो 4 बच्चे हैं, 2 लड़का है 2 लड़की है। माय फादर तो छोड़ के जाते समय मैं तो 1 साल की बच्ची है। उसी टाइम मेरे को तो कुछ पता नहीं है मेरे पापा का बारे में। फिर आर्मी में तो सभी लोग सोचा है हमारा माँ पापा तो जिंदा है करके। फिर तो 46 में 42 में मेरा फादर गए, 46 में गए, मैं तो पता चला था मेरा फादर तो मर गया करके। उसी टाइम सभी को पता है, उसी टाइम मेरा माँ है अकेली है, 4 बच्चों को रखे तो बहुत मुश्किल से पालन किया। तभी हमारा माँ का ब्रदर है, हम लोग को लेके सभी तो बड़ा किया। वैसे तो पढ़ाया है, सब कुछ किया। इसलिए ना मेरे को तो मेरे फादर का तो ज़्यादा तो कुछ जानती नहीं है वैसा तो ना। फिर तो हम लोग को पढ़ा है, हम लोग को तो काम हमें बेटा, फिर शादी के बाद तो हम लोग को अच्छे वैसे ही रहते। अभी तो 4 बच्चों भी हम लोग को जिंदा है, मैं तो लास्ट है। मेरे बड़ा भाई का तो 93 है, मेरा बहन को तो 90 ईयर्स है, और दूसरा भाई का तो 88 है, मैं तो 85।
आप इनफैक्ट सिंगापुर भी गए थे,
सिंगापुर में तो
और आप वहाँ पे जाके आपने देखा पहली बार कि उनका नाम वहाँ पे लिखा हुआ था। तो कुछ आप बोलना चाहेंगे उस टाइम आपको कैसा?
उसी टाइम था ना 2024 अप्रैल में तो हम लोग को सिंगापुर गया। इसलिए हमारा डॉटर तो वो स्टेट्स में है, उन्हें रिसर्च किया करके तो वो उसने वो गौतम साहब से ये बता के सब जगह तो देखे हम लोग को। वैसे इतना सिंगापुर जाके वो सब कुछ हम लोग को देख के आए हम। उसकी बात है हम लोग का तो, उसकी पहले तो हमारा पापा का सोचने से तो रोना नहीं आता है। अभी तो जो भी कुछ सोचने भी तो इतना रोने आते हैं।
थैंक यू सो मच। इनफैक्ट वी फील फॉर यू, एंड हमें मतलब शुक्रगुजार है कि आप आज इधर आए और आपने अपनी मेमोरी शेयर की हमारे साथ। आई थिंक ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ एवरीवन आई कैन से दैट वी रियली चेरिश दोज मेमोरीज, and we stand in gratitude to all the families.
मेरा वन डॉटर तो है बैंगलोर, हमारा वन डॉटर तो नहीं ना बैंगलोर में।
डॉटर
वन डॉटर है, वन स्टेट्स में। और लड़का था सैलम में, हम
नहीं,
सैलम
बहुत
से आए,
बढ़िया।
मैं सैलम से आई।
बहुत बढ़िया. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it's an honor to have you here with us today. In fact, it'll be a great pleasure if you could give a brief introduction about
Okay,
your father
okay.
and then also.
Yeah,
a
I'll do
bit-
that. Okay then. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the very outset, first of all, on behalf of all those 62,000 forgotten prisoners of war, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude and thanks to Gautam Hazarika for having brought out their stories. In fact, they are forgotten stories actually. Nobody actually bothered about them, as I recollect. Of course, British Army would in any case not bother. For them, it was, as you mentioned, it is the Indian soldiers were cannon fodder to be sacrificed. So we didn't expect much from the British Army. But we were expecting the Indian government to do something for them. But unfortunately, nothing happened. Till a couple of years back, at least personally speaking, my father, somebody came and then interviewed my mother and brought out that in a paper a couple of years back in Mysore. That is another story. Out of these 62, as he brought 1,000 are from Karnataka and about 100 from Bangalore, Mysore, and from Cook, perhaps my father was the only one, as I recollect. Giving little bit about my father, as I heard from my dadis and nanis, he was a very brilliant student in the school and did matriculation in those days. Matriculation was a big thing, and he did and passed out in high percentage. And he was one of the brilliant hockey players, in fact, in Cook. He was known for his hockey and he was a fullback. And people would say nobody could go beyond him in any hockey field. Having said that, after finishing the matriculation, like all of Cooks in those days, there were only two professions for them. Either join the army or do the farming. We are known for that, either farmers or warriors. Of course, those not so good fellows used to go to forest department and police department. There are sayings on them also. But I mean, that's my part. So he joined the Mysore infantry. And there also he shined very well. Within a short period of time, he became from a Sipai to Alda Major. And that's when he got married to my mother in 1939, that is. And after a couple of months of marriage only, he was sent for a training in Mao. That is for his, because of his brilliance, they were wanting to promote him and do things for a brighter future. He was sent to Mao for training. And at that time, my mother was carrying. And then he went to the training. That's when the Second World War picked up. And when he finished his training, though he was told when he was sent for training, he was on leave. But he was told, you come, finish the training, then you can continue your leave. That was 2 months or 3 months of training. I don't know how much it was. But when he went for training, after the training was finished, he was told to move along with him. Because by then his battalion had moved to the east and he was told to join them without even going back to Cook. And we didn't know. Of course, I was not born, but I believe the families didn't know. And he moved on. And except that he said, I'm moving to the war. And after that, we never heard anything from him. And mother, carrying the baby, gave birth to his daughter, and she was absolutely depressed. And her father, of course, she had lost her mother already. So her father brought her to their place, and she had 4 sisters and a brother. And father told them, she's under depression, she's under stress, so don't bother her. You take care of her and her child. And in fact, my elder sister was totally taken care by the sisters. My mother was always in a depression mode, not knowing what's happening. And months rolled by, years rolled by, and rumors started floating in Coog and everywhere that now that Second World War is gone into such a thing, he is gone. He's not there anymore. And in Coog, even in those days, widow marriage was not a taboo. even though we are very conservative, this was one thing where ladies were given the equal rights, everything was equal, and she was being coaxed by the relatives and others. Now that is gone, that we know, though there was no news about it, she was kind of told, why don't you get married? She said, no, unless I get a confirmed information, I don't want to do anything like that. Then as the years passed, 1 or 2 years, even the parents, her father and my dada dadi, they also started pressurizing her because they're seeing her in pain and problem. So they were saying, no point in waiting for long. In fact, my father's father, my dada that is, worrying about him, waiting for him, he passed away very, very early age. Early age meaning 50s or 60s, between 50 and 60. But the dadi and my nana, they were forcing my mother to get married. And a lot of suitors also. As you're saying, she was a very pretty woman. So there were a lot of suitors who were coming for her. But she would not budge. In fact, whenever the father pressurized her, she would move to the mother-in-law's place. And mother-in-law, whenever she pressurized, she used to move to father's place, shifting from place to place. And then along with her brother and even mother-in-law, she went to all the temples that's possible in Coorg, praying for him. Every temple, we have Muttappa temple, Ayyappa temple, and many Shiva temples and all temples. And every year they used to go to the Muttappa temple. The saying which used to go, that fellow gets that spirit in him. He used to tell, I believe, my mother and mother-in-law, don't worry, I'm there, I'll protect him. That is what was being told. So they were coming back with a hope. And finally, after 5 years, in 1945, once the war ended and everything is over, and in any case, people had forgotten about my father. Suddenly one day, one telegram arrived from Colombo to my nana. And those days in Coorg, I don't know how many of you have been there or you know about it. It was a small place and everybody knew everybody else. The postman who had the telegram went looking for my nana and he was having his lunch and he gave it to him, the telegram, and in which it said, arriving Colombo, from Colombo tomorrow, something like that had come. Then he gave it to his son, that is my uncle. In fact, I had asked him to come, but unfortunately he couldn't come. He's pretty old, so he couldn't come. I believe they were all so excited with the telegram, and he ran from, in Virajpet, if you know, there is a clock tower to my place, which is about 2-3 kilometers. He says, even today, when I was speaking to you, saying it was such a moment for all of us when we heard that he is coming. Somebody who's been forgotten totally is coming. Everybody was under this thing, and he ran to give the information, this good information, to my mother and the dadi. That is one side of it. And after that, my father came. In fact, he landed in Bangalore. From Colombo, they came to Madras to Bangalore. And my uncle was here near Minerva. He was a manager there. I believe went there. And in fact, my aunt says when he came and stood at the gate, I saw one man looking absolutely in a bad shape, in a half pant with big beard, and she just couldn't recognize him. And she went and told her husband, somebody is there at the gate. I think he's come for some begging or something. I don't know what to do. You go and have a look. When he went and he recognized him, and he says, what are you saying? He's my brother-in-law, because my uncle was my mother's eldest brother. He says, can't you make out? And in fact, the aunt couldn't make out. To that bad shape it was. Talking about his treatment in Singapore, where they were captured, the 62,000, which is all come out in the book. The Japanese today, they are very, very peace-loving. But Japanese are as ruthless as the Chinese or anybody else as far as the prisoners were concerned. It's only after the Second World War, after probably the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they must have become a peace-loving people. Today, they are absolutely very nice, peace-loving people, always looking for peace. But those days, they were absolutely ruthless. And my father, though never used to tell us so openly, used to tell among his friends and others the kind of hardship they were going through, and talking about the IMA forcing them to join. In fact, many of them didn't join, and those who joined, they were also, for them, Japanese, again, like the British, it was a cannon fodder, but Japanese also, they were cannon fodder. It's not that they were interested in the Indian independence. It was just they wanted them to fight for them. That was their aim rather than giving independence. And he is, as he rightly brought out, it is Mohan Singh who's the one who's actually were doing that. And he got disillusioned, and I think he left. I don't know, he left. And of course, Netaji got all the credit. That's another story. But coming back, the ruthlessness was so much of hard labor, and no food. I mean, hardly any food. Even the Red Cross things which used to come, they never got any. Finally, when he came, he just came empty-handed, without anything, as you're saying, in the dress that you mentioned. Then they came back, but after coming back, it was even a bigger shock, because they were tried as the war criminals. Those who opted for it, as well as those who were forced into it. In fact, my father, along with the second batch of people who were supposed to be for the IMA, the first batch of people were already there, and then second batch of people were told to be ready, but they didn't have the arms for arming them, and they didn't want also the Japanese. They wanted the first batch, and then after that, after they're finished, then maybe pass on to the second. Probably that must be. We don't know what was their intention. However, by then the war war ended, and so they were all sent back. But the British Army did a full court of inquiry, where my father also from Bangalore, he was sent to Delhi and facing the court of inquiry. Luckily, in fact, that I didn't know, he brought out that they were, though he was cleared of the war criminal, but then there was some remark which was made probably. And his promotions were all held up. He was feeling so bad that having done so much and his career being so bright, and those compatriots who joined along with him are a few of the Coorg people, Coorg officers only, or Coorg people who went. They are all had become officers, and they were already majors, and whereas my father was still a Jamadar major. So he was saying, I was much ahead of them, and they're all now officers, and I'm here. So I believe he went to his British superior who was there and told him, what should I do? If you were me, what you would have done? And I believe that for a very nice person he was. He said, if I were in your position, I'll quit. And the very day he came in putting in his resignation and went back to Coorg. And went back to Coorg. Those days, Coorg was a sea state, as you all know. And it was being ruled. I mean, in a sense, the administrator was CC, Chief Commissioner, and was one Colonel Daya Singh Bedi, who was CC. And he went and met him. And he heard about him and they talked. Of course, the Fauji relation was there. And after that, he offered him, I will give you 2 types of jobs. There is an excise inspector job, which is available. Those days, prohibition was on. And otherwise, a teacher's job. Excise inspector was a very lucrative job, as it is today also. But my father said, I've had enough in my life. And now I want to have a peaceful life and teach the children. I want to be with them. And he was a very, very brilliant in mathematics, in fact. So he said, I would like to take a teaching job. And he became a teacher after that and continued his life till he passed away in 1978. My mother, with all those 5 years of hardship that went through, and in fact, just side stories, after my father came back, my mother and the mother-in-law, they went to the same Muttappa temple to say thank you to the god. And that fellow who gets that thing, again, he saw them both, because they had recognized me, because every year they're going. Again, he's telling you, okay, Pedikanda, in Malayalam, Pedikanda, don't get scared, I will bring him back. Don't worry, I'm protecting him. And somebody who's standing next to me says, Bandatundu. That means, oh, he's come. So that is how it is. I'm just, these are the things. And then the whole thing, like the mother was saying, but as those 5 years, what all she went through and how she faced them, And after that, I was born incidentally. In fact, 46, I was born after he came back at the end of 45, and 46 December I was born. And they say, because I was a very weak-looking fellow, because everybody thought that in Japan, Singapore, where he was imprisoned, probably he didn't have that nourishment. That's why probably the child is so sickly and and because of that, even today my wife says you are a very pampered child. I was indeed was pampered because I was born after 5 years and a boy, and my sister was 6 years senior to me, and I was indeed a pampered child. But I was nowhere sick. I was lean and thin, but then everybody thought, oh, poor chap, he hasn't had enough nourishment. That's why he's like that. And after that, I mean, just to conclude things, as I did my engineering from Suratkal. After that, I wanted to join the Air Force. I mean, it happened. I was selected in the university entry scheme at the final year, pre-final year, and I said I want to join the Air Force. Everyone in the Coog, in my relatives, whoever was my well-wishers, is saying, "What is wrong with you? After doing engineering, who will join military?" And the Tatas, in fact, had offered me. I'd gone also to Bombay, Tata Hydro, and spent 2 months and came back for whatever another reason. But then I said, I'm joining one. It was only my father who said, if that is your dream, go and join. And I joined. And today I'm an Air Marshal, of course, thanks to the destiny. And at a later stage, unfortunately, my father couldn't see me rising in the Air Force. But my mother saw me right through my Air Marshal. And people used to come, the well-wishers used to come, look at, they used to tell her, see, those days we were all telling him to join Tatas and other places. And he, defying everybody, joined Air Force. Today, he has the respect because he's raised, he's top of in the Air Force for a technical man. And it's all your effort, your luck. You have brought him that thing. And I believe in that. In fact, I was very close to the mother till the end, and she passed away a couple of years back. And after that, in fact, my going to Coog is also reduced considerably because that affects even today. So that's my story. I mean, more than me, my parents' story. And like that, mine is probably one of those stories, but those 62 persons were the prisoners of war. And those families, like she was bringing out, each one of them would have gone through. I have not gone through. I have only heard from mothers what. But imagine the plight of the wives and the near and dear ones of those 62,000 people. And why the nation has no gratitude for them or no thankfulness for them, I have not been able to understand. Is it our selfishness, or we don't have a national feeling for us? I don't know. In fact, I always say this, I keep saying this, we, the Indians, are very good about me, my family, my community, my society, my colony, finally my caste, my state, district, state, nation comes last. I think it's time that we, of course, as I can see, we are all, by and large, very few youngsters I see. I think it's for the youngsters to change this, to bring in nation first and then come down to the individual. I think that change has to take place. This is my strongest feeling for us to see the Viksit Bharat, which our Prime Minister is dreaming of by 47. That has to happen. We have to change this attitude from me to the nation. With that, thank you very much for giving me. And thank you, Gautam, for giving me this opportunity of calling. Unfortunately, Bangalore being what it is, the traffic, I'm coming from Jalahalli, started at 4:30 and reached at 6:45, 7. So, in fact, you kind of counseled me saying that don't worry, you come, whatever time it is, come. That's why I took that courage to come. Otherwise, being a Fauji, 6 o'clock was told to me, 6:30 ho gaya and you're still stuck in the traffic. And I rang you up again saying that what's happening? He says, come. And Arjun is here. Arjun is an old friend of mine. We have done a lot of things together in the Fauj also. So you would wonder what kind of a military officer is who's landing up off. It's only politicians who do that.
No, sir, not at all. In fact, as they say, better late than never.
I know. In fact, he said better late than never, but you come whatever time it may be. In fact, my wife was very hesitant. She said, no. I think it's not the time to go. Let's go back and say sorry later on.
No, thank you
But,
so much. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks
It's
for
a
calling
pleasure.
me.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. And thank you for your words of wisdom. We really appreciate it. And we also appreciate the sacrifice which your family and the others have undertaken. Thank you so much. In fact, if I may please request Aliye to share something about her dear great grandfather who was there during World War II. They were in the same unit.
Okay.
Yes, Mysore infantry.
Buddy, and I'd really like to thank you for this opportunity to share our story with you. I am actually sitting here on behalf of my mother because she said that sharing this, what she's written down for me to read out would be very emotional. So this is on her behalf. Yours, Mom. So my grandfather was part of the Allied forces. He was in Singapore. He was a prisoner of war with the Japanese and also missing in action. He was MIA for 2 years. And my grandmother and he got married in 1938, and a year later war broke out, and he had to go when called. And it was very hard for her because she didn't. My early recollections of the story is that it was extremely hard for her because she was very young. She had a small son to look after alone in Bangalore, and she didn't know if her husband was alive or dead at that point in time. And we also have, so this is also a little bit on the way here that my mother told me, so I'd also like to mention them and honor them. We have another member of the extended family, Captain Inayat Ali, who was part of the INA. He chose to join. And another family member, Second Lieutenant Mirza Sadiq Ali Khan, who was one of those who was executed. He was beheaded in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. So I'm now going to just read out what my mother wrote and share that with you. So I'm, thank you. So a lot of what we gathered from that time, before I read, I'd also like to mention, because Gautam has very kindly given me this as a size indicator. We found, my grandfather passed away in 1987, and it was because he had a ruptured ulcer. The ulcers were a result of being in the prisoner of war camp, and he said that they existed on a very thin gruel of tapioca root. And so he came back with those ulcers and a lot of other health issues. So when he passed away, amongst his possessions, we found this very small, very, very small black diary that was written with pencil. And in it were photographs of my grandmother and my uncle. I would like to think that that was what kept him going, their memory. And in it were notes about his personal reflections on life, things that he felt about family, love, relationships, partnership. And also towards the end were scribbles about the dilemmas of visits from officers in the INA, and to join or not to join, to break the oath or not to break the oath. There was just dates and sometimes timings of people who would come quietly and talk to the men. So the size of the diary was this small. It's a very, very small book, and I feel that it was easy for him to keep it hidden either on his person or in his possessions. Thank you. So in my mother's words, my father, Lieutenant Colonel Mir Sarfaraz Hussain OBE, was a war veteran and a prisoner of war during the Second World War. He and his unit were on the way to fight against the Germans when they were asked to return to Bangalore, as the Japanese had entered the World War II by attacking Pearl Harbor, and they were asked to go to Singapore instead. After a few skirmishes, the Allies surrendered to the Japanese, and my father was made a prisoner of war along with his unit. And being the senior most officer at the time, he suffered great trauma and torture. My brother was a few months old when my father left for the war, and just 6 months before his release, my father died of meningitis. The story in the family is that there were bunkers that were dug in Bangalore. They were like large tunnels because Bangalore was always in fear that after Madras, it would be Bangalore that would be bombed. So they would periodically, when there were sirens that would go, am I right? They would have to take shelter in the bunkers where apparently he fell ill and then he contracted meningitis and he was 7 when he passed away. And my grandfather was not here. So my brother was just a few months old when my father left for the war, and just 6 months before his release, my brother died of meningitis. My mother was devastated to lose her son and not know if her husband would come back alive. It was a terrible time for her, but being a positive person, she thanked God for bringing her husband home eventually. So I'm just adding little bit. So he did not know that his son had died till he docked in Madras, and then he was told that he no longer had a child, and my mother was born a few years after his return. My father was a broken man when General Ayappa broke the news to him about his son's passing, but life went on, and being a prisoner of war, the prisoner of war experience made him even more of a wonderful human being, appreciating every small thing in life so lovingly and caringly. We grew up experiencing him having terrible nightmares. He would walk up and down at night, unable to sleep, dreaming of the tortures and seeing his friends and soldiers dying. I think he witnessed the execution of Mirza Sadat Ali Khan. He was beheaded in front of him. He also said that when people tried to escape, they were brought in, and in front of their senior most officer, they were executed. He was unable to see the movie Bridge on the River Kwai as it was his story. While the colonel in the movie was building bridges, my father and his soldiers were building the railroad as labor force. The same torture and the bravery in the movie is what he and his unit endured. The relics of the war that he had, like the samurai sword, which was given to him by the Japanese colonel at the time of surrender, his medals, his diary, and other things was given to his regimental museum, that is Wellington, as part of the 18th Madras. It used to be such a wonderful feeling when General Timaya, my father's childhood friend, and General Karyappa would come home. I grew up being a regular tomboy, wanting to join the army like him and be like them. But being a girl, my grandmother didn't allow it. To this day, when I attend an army function or hear our army band play our national anthem or the regimental tunes, I cry. May God bless our brave soldiers and keep them safe. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's been such a deep insight into how the families felt, and thanks to all of you that we've been able to sort of understand, because there are no words which which we can understand after what you all would have actually felt. Thank you so much for being such a supportive and a wonderful audience. We are open for questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you know, but Varun Khanna is Varun. You want to tell them about your Bangalore story?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so my grandfather, he was in fact from a village called Bhawan in Chakwal district, which was in around Jhelum. So he, in fact, came into officers training school in Bangalore, and he got commissioned into 5th Battalion, 1st Punjab. And he, in fact, thereafter, he went into Burma theater. And one of the ferocious battles which he was part of was actually Battle of Ramri. And I do recollect him actually saying that, in fact, the main predator over there was not the soldiers, but the crocodiles. And they could actually hear the Japanese shouting at night, because the Japanese actually, as it was a land-borne assault, and basically the Japanese were moving backwards. So very briefly, post-war, he in fact he was a part of the British Commonwealth Occupation Force, and he was based in Totori. And then my story actually starts is that when he passed on, in his trunk, I found some letters which were written to him during the Second World War. And what excited me was that there was a postmark with just a number, and it just said FPO number 70, and there was no postage stamp. So that is when, in fact, I started, in fact, researching on the field post offices of Indian Army Postal Service during the Second World War and prior. So now, actually, as a hobbyist, I'm also a philatelist. So if any of you have any old letters, you want any information, please give me a shout. It will be a pleasure, I think. Thank you so much.
One question for clarification. Thank you for the book and for this session. What were the rules when somebody in the army was captured? Did their families continue to get a salary or a pension or something, regardless of whether they were in INA or not?
Yeah.
And what about if they were British versus if they were Indian?
All Allied POWs, the families received money. Basically, when a soldier was sent overseas, when he was serving in India, he used to get his money every month and decide how to spend it. When he was sent overseas, he used to be asked, what is your family allowance? That means if he gets paid 100 rupees a month, he will decide in advance that, I don't know, 60, 70, 80, 90 will go to his family. And that used to continue. In fact, when the Japanese captured Singapore, they started sending messages from Indian soldiers in Singapore back to India. And they received some messages back. And when they received those messages back, were from the family saying, oh, we are fine, we are receiving the family allowance. And that really, immediately when the Japanese heard this, they stopped this system because they had told the Indian soldiers that the British are horrible and they're not paying your family allowance. And then they were, of course, very happy to hear that they were getting the family allowance, but then that sort of spoiled the anti-British thing that the Japanese were trying to do. So they were getting the family allowance, and but news about the status, whether they were alive or dead, was very sketchy. Some were declared dead, some were declared as prisoners, and some were missing in action. So it was not very clear, and there was very little communication. I think most soldiers maybe received one postcard during the entire 5 years. And as to whether any of the, and I think they might have been asked to, given permission to send a couple of letters, but I don't know if they reached. I do know only one officer with all his papers, including letters from Lahore and letters sent back from Singapore, but I haven't seen any others.
Letters were definitely going through, and it was initiated by the Indian Army Postal Service. And they also worked with the Allied. Now, the British actually had their own Army Postal Service, so all the Allied forces, they actually worked together and ensured that this mail would reach either the soldier or the family.
I have a question for Gautam. I'm really curious to know where your research began. Like, what was that first point of the story, and then how did it progress from there?
There's a gentleman called Jaya in Singapore who told me one day, I remember the day, it was 7th October, the year before 7th October 23, when he told me on the phone that we were talking about something, and he said the Japanese sent thousands of Indian soldiers to islands in the Pacific, which is the term that he used. At that time, I was researching something else and I didn't do anything about it. But 6 months later, I started looking into Indian prisoners, New Guinea, and I found 2 or 3 articles. And that's how it began. And then I found the story very compelling, etc. And then when I Googled Indian prisoners, then I found Sir's father's story. What an incredible story. Sorry? Military archives, that all, it started that way. For the New Guinea chapter, the Australians liberated the Indian POWs, and we owe a great debt to Australia. Nobody cared about those men. It was only the Australians who, when the war ended and they saw these emaciated men in New Guinea, the British were there and the Australians were there. The British asked them one thing: did you join the INA or not? They didn't care what the condition of the soldiers was. The Australians didn't care a fig about INA. They saw the men and they say, what happened to you? How did this happen? And then they put it all together, and Jamadar Chin Singh was the star of the evidence story. So it was a great thing that the Americans. So that is that is Warrant Officer John Baptist Crasta, who wrote the Eaten by the Japanese. Yeah. His son and daughter live here, and I hope to have them at the next talk.
Good evening, all. My question is to Air Marshal, sir. Sir, you wonderfully pointed out how the quality of putting nation above everything else is eroding sadly in the current scenario. Sir, what would be your strategies for the youth to take up the quality of putting nation above everything else? And first,
You in fact asked a very good question, and to say in a humble way, I've started this in my own college. I'm talking about engineering college, Suratkal, where we have started, because the present director there, he also is very keen that the youngsters should get into this, imbibe the ethos of the armed forces. Even if they don't join the armed forces, doesn't matter. For we, the armed forces people, nation comes first, as you all know. So at least those ethos, whatever it is, whether it is the honesty, integrity, discipline, those things, and caring for the nation. So we have started a course in engineering college with a minor degree, which will be given to the students who opt for it. And it will go through those 4 years. And at the end of it, whoever successfully completes will be given that degree. That is one way of. And the second thing is, wherever I go to the colleges or the schools, when they invite me, I speak about it, try to motivate these students. In fact, many places I say, don't listen to your parents, because they are the past generation, you are the future. And in fact, you correct them. That's what I tell them. And follow your passion and follow the career that you want to choose. Unlike our time where your father said you become an engineer, we became an engineer. But you choose your career and choose it so that you're looking at the nation rather than about yourself or your family. This is what I'm trying to propagate, and I'm sure it'll catch up. It's always somebody to start, and many people, I'm sure, like me, there are many who are doing this kind of a job. And a subtle change, it'll take some time, but it'll take, because it's years. Our old Gurukul system, which was there, when it was nation which was there, they were thinking about it. But later on, maybe the British, again, in the 250 years of their rule, they've almost killed everything of our education system and everything. So now we have to get it back. So that is the way I feel things will move in the forward. That's my take on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.